This is part 3 of my recording of the paper Whither Gold, originally published in 1996 by Professor Antal Fekete. Mené Tekel. But the distinctive property of gold, that it is the only remaining monetary metal around in the closing decade of the 20th century, should not blot out entirely the dualistic nature of money. In fact, it is monetary dualism that provides the only rational explanation for the occasional breakdown of the monetary system. During periods of great monetary disturbance, such as hyperinflation, the distinction between the two kinds of marketability is most dramatically revived by the market. For shorter or longer periods, the government may succeed in forcing the circulation of irredeemable banknotes, which may retain the characteristics of the most saleable asset. Yet at the same time, the government is patently unable to make these credit instruments the most hoardable asset. Although the fast appreciating banknote is still usable in transmitting value through space, it suffers from a fatal paralysis when trying to transmit value through time. It is inevitable that, ultimately, gold should assert its position as the most hoardable asset. Nor is there anything governments can do to save their irredeemable paper from monetary destruction. Even if they succeed in banning the ownership of and trading in gold, a number of other commodities stand ready to step up into the golden slippers to assume the role of the most hoardable asset. The most conspicuous defect of the quantity theory of money is its utter failure in explaining the hyperinflationary episodes of history. Overissue of the fiat currency certainly cannot be the cause of the malady. It has been convincingly demonstrated that, especially in the final phases, there was always a desperate shortage of the doomed currency. Hyperinflation has nothing to do with quantity. It has everything to do with quality of money. The true cause of hyperinflation is the inexorable human need for a most hoardable asset. It is the relentless search for a reliable transmitter of value through time. Those who believe that the millennium of irredeemable currency has arrived must believe that governments have found a way to change human nature by legislative fiat. Under the regime of irredeemable currency, hyperinflation is inevitable, unless gold is once more allowed to play its historical role that has been taken away from it through government coercion, the role of the most hoardable asset. The full implications of the inevitability of a breakdown in the regime of irredeemable currency are not yet clear to most people. Purveyors of goods and services are still willing to give up real value in exchange for irredeemable promises. This ignorance may, of course, help postpone the moment of truth. In the meantime, Lincoln's dictum should be remembered, according to which it may be possible to fool some people all of the time, even to fool all the people some of the time, but it is not possible to fool all the people all of the time. Certain monetary economists can see the writing on the wall, Mené Tekel. Your days are numbered. You have been weighed in the balance and found wanting. Announcing the verdict on the regime of irredeemable currencies. They propose a solution that would tie the value of the currency to that of a basket of commodities. Some go as far as suggesting that, horrible dictu, even gold may be put into the basket. There is nothing new in these proposals. F.A. Hayek suggested it in 1943 in a paper entitled Commodity Reserve Currency. It is extremely doubtful that Hayek's scheme would work. Let us disregard the utter naivety of the scheme in ignoring the cost of warehousing perishable goods. and ignoring the problem of quality control. Let us consider the scheme in its simplest form, known as psi-metallism, originally proposed by the British economist Alfred Marshall 100 years ago, but never tried in practice, whose unit of value is a basket consisting of a fixed amount of gold and a fixed amount of silver. Unlike bimetallism, this arrangement would let the prices of the monetary metals vary. We now show that psi-metallism, no less bimetallism, which Milton Friedman called preferable to gold monometallism in his book Money Mischief, would be shipwrecked on the rock of gold's constant marginal utility. The market would stamp out psi-metallism even faster than bimetallism, precisely because of the price flexibility the former affords. The gold-silver ratio would widen further for reasons already discussed. The profit opportunities offered by psi-metallism would result in a relentless arbitrage out of silver and into gold. The arbitrageur would redeem his currency in gold and silver. Then he would sell the silver and keep the gold. When the anticipated rise in the price of gold materialized, he would buy back his silver for less, and unwind his arbitrage by surrendering the same amount of gold and silver in exchange for psi-metallic currency, showing a net profit in gold. Let us note in passing that the scheme concocted at Maastricht, introducing yet another irredeemable monetary unit, the euro, defined as a basket of irredeemable currencies, is doomed for the same reason. The currency that depreciates at the lowest rate, in this case the German mark, far from imparting strength to other currencies in the basket, would make them even weaker. Arbitrage would act as centrifuge, separating the components of the basket, throwing away the soft and keeping only the hardest of hard currencies. If marks, livres, etc. were no longer available for trading, then the object of arbitrage would be the central bank assets that have been used to balance liabilities in marks, livres, etc. The authors of the Maastricht scheme turned the ancient wisdom that had no chain can be stronger than its weakest link upside down. They have invented a chain that is as strong as its strongest link. Part 2. Towards a new theory of interest. The nature of interest is one of the great problems of humankind, as old as money itself. It has engaged the greatest minds, from Aristotle through the Church Fathers to Menger. The lack of a satisfactory solution to the problem has rocked empires, contributing to their destruction. This author hopes that his essay can make a modest contribution to the ultimate disposal of this great and vexed problem. Part of the difficulty is in the way the question has traditionally been presented, namely, what happens when a man with a need to borrow meets another with money to lend? It has always been in this context that usury was condemned by both criminal and canon law. It has not occurred to the philosophers and moralists, or for that matter to most economists, that the nature of interest could be better grasped if the question was reformulated thus. What happens when a man with income to spare, but who is in need of wealth, meets another with wealth to spare, but who is in need of an income? The resulting exchanges provide a passage from direct to indirect conversion of wealth and income. Indirect conversion represents a great improvement in efficiency over direct conversion, interest being the manifestation of the market value of this improvement. Thus, the proper setting for the study of interest is the indirect conversion of income into wealth, just as the proper setting for the study of price is the indirect exchange of goods. It now appears that condemnation of usury is akin to condemning a man for charging or paying the going price for bread. Traditionally, interest is conceived as a steady income in perpetuity which is exchanged for the unit of wealth. It can be measured as a percentage of the unit of wealth accruing as income to its owner after the exchange. If the unit of wealth is $1 gold and it is exchanged for an income in perpetuity amounting to 1 gold cent per quarter, then the rate of interest is 4% per annum. Of course, an income in perpetuity is an abstraction, but it has great theoretical importance as the standard measuring interest. The mathematician has shown us exact formulas expressing the rate of interest involved in exchanges of wealth for income for a set period of time, as well as formulas expressing the rate of interest involved in exchanging present for future wealth, in terms of this standard, making arbitrage between various credit markets possible. I shall not pause here to give an ironclad definition between wealth and income. Suffice it to say that an inexorable need exists, second only to the need for food and shelter, urging man to convert income into wealth in order that latter, when past his prime, he may convert his wealth back into income. As the comedy of King Midas and the tragedy of King Lear show, a most important difference exists between controlling wealth and controlling income, and the possibility of converting one into the other must not be taken for granted. Income is an ultimate end for man, insofar as without it he may have no other ultimate ends on earth. If denied an income, he, as King Midas, is in danger of starving to death. Since wealth is an indispensable means to that end, in the twilight years of his life, man's needs for a reliable conversion mechanism is beyond doubt. Without such, he may, as King Lear, end up losing both his wealth and income. The theory of private property ought to take full account of the fact that conversion of income into wealth is the rational and characteristically human manifestation of the law of the biosphere, whereby all living things can only survive and prosper by hoarding their substance. In the case of man, this substance, as we have seen, is the most marketable commodity, gold, which is always in demand, whether it is offered in the largest or in the smallest practically realizable quantity, since it can always be traded with the smallest possible exchange losses. The chimera of hoarding. Here we come to a paradox which utilitarian philosophy has failed to solve. An apparent contradiction exists between the needs of the individual and his society. There is a time in the life of every man when he wishes to draw on his savings accumulated earlier. Yet hoarding and dishoarding are widely considered as antisocial. They are unsettling as the former affects demand and the latter affects supply unfavorably, possibly at a time that is inopportune from the point of view of society. The utilitarian philosophers could not clarify how the market provides for the conflicting demands of society and its aging members. Utilitarian philosophy has failed to solve the problem of hoarding and dishoarding. In particular, it has failed to explode the arguments of Silvio Gesell, John Maynard Keynes, and other inflationists, according to which the contractionist and deflationary pressures inherent in a metallic monetary system are the source of poverty and chronic economic distress, as they invite hoarding. At the same time, these authors describe the promised land of the inflationist paradise in glowing terms. There, the miracle of turning the stone into bread would be routinely performed by monetary technicians in the service of the government for the benefit of the people. In what follows, I refute the inflationist argument in the spirit of utilitarian philosophy, hoping to remove an obstacle which has blocked the advancement of monetary science for 100 years. The invention of double-entry bookkeeping in Italy of the Trecento was a momentous landmark in the economic history. Goethe called it, quote, one of the finest inventions of the human mind, unquote. Double-entry bookkeeping is of utmost economic importance, second only to the appearance of indirect exchange much earlier that had made direct exchange of goods obsolete. The new invention made the indirect accumulation of capital via the instrument of contract possible, thus making the direct accumulation of capital via hoarding obsolete. Previously, there was only one way for people to convert income into wealth or wealth into income outside of family bonds: hoarding and dishoarding. For much of the Orient, which was slower in developing the institutional framework to protect contractual rights, it is still the only way. This immobilized large amounts of gold and made capital accumulation an arduous and protracted process in which rewards was far removed from effort, dampening incentive. The invention of double-entry bookkeeping made possible a heretofore unprecedented increase in the efficiency of gold as the catalyst of capital accumulation. Gold's physical presence was no longer necessary in every conversion. From then on, gold could act by proxy, as its role in the conversion has become residual. Thanks to this breakthrough, partnerships can now be formed representing an exchange of income of the junior partner from wealth of the senior partner. Later, with the gradual acceptance of sleeping partners in the firm, it became possible to buy and sell shares in the enterprise as if they were fixed income securities. Indeed, this they were in all but name, in order to avoid censure by canonical and secular authorities under the usury laws. It is clear that without double-entry bookkeeping, balance sheets and income statements, trade in shares would not have been possible, nor could a departing partner have been bought out. There would have been no precise and objective way of attaching value to the assets and liabilities of the firm short of liquidation. The new development released huge amounts of gold from private hoards as people began to accumulate and carry wealth in the form of securities disguised as partnership equity. By contrast, in the Orient, where the social and institutional arrangements were far more inimical to the individual and his freedom to choose, the demand for gold and silver for hoarding purposes continued unabated. During the Quattrocento, gold disgorged by the Occident flowed to the Orient to finance the trade in exotic goods. Myrrh, spices, silk, and satin enjoyed exceptionally high marketability in the Occident, where all the great banking houses engaged in financing this lucrative trade. The world was treated to the curious spectacle that the Occident was thriving while losing gold to the Orient, because it had learned how to get by with less. It had learned to exchange wealth and income. This shows that gold is merely the whipping boy at the hand of the inflationists. Gold is not scarce. In fact, as measured by stocks to flows ratio mentioned above, the monetary metal is more abundant than any other economic good. But it quickly goes into hiding at the moment inflation has gained the upper hand. There is no contradiction between the interests of society and its aging members. Very little, if any, gold is needed to complete all the exchanges of income and wealth in the course of normal business, provided that the free choice of individuals is allowed to prevail. Only when government interference is feared or expected does the demand for gold become disturbing. The current policy is hands off. Let the market decide what is best for its participants. Squaring the diagonal. The next advance came with the Reformation, during which the canonical and secular strictures on interest were eased, the definition of usury narrowed, and later the prohibition against both repealed. Whereas the partnership contract had originally been designed with the concealment of interest in mind, then it became possible for the first time in history to openly engage in the exchange of income and wealth, with the payment of interest freely admitted and the rate of interest explicitly quoted. The bond market was born as a result of these historical changes. The right to income reserved by the bondholder can now enjoy the same legal protection as the right to rent charges enjoyed during the Prohibition era. Thus, it remained for the Reformation to crown the great economic advances of the Renaissance, to free the exchange of income and wealth from its former fetters. For the first time in history, the rate of interest could manifest itself as a market phenomenon. The analysis of the formation of interest rates is usually given in terms of a diagonal model featuring just two participants in the market, the supplier and the user of loanable funds. This model is woefully inadequate, as it blots out the time element in the crucial process of capital formation. It ignores the principle of capitalizing income, and it confuses saving and investment. The present analysis will replace the diagonal model first with a square, then a pentagonal, and finally a hexagonal model, in order to gain a more penetrating insight into the process of capital formation. First, we take a look at the square model, which has the merit of identifying the supply of and demand for wealth and income. In considering the problem of converting income into wealth and wealth into income, we may isolate two fundamental needs. 1. The annuitant's need to convert income into future wealth, and 2. The annuitant's need to convert wealth into income. Typically, the annuitant is a young man who is looking forward to getting married. He tries to provide for the future needs of his family, for the education of his children, and for his and his wife's old age. By contrast, the annuitant is a man in his harvest years, looking forward to his twilight years with equanimity. He has by now accumulated the wealth which he is ready to convert into a suitable income. If the annuitant or annuitant is restricted to direct conversion due to institutional restraints on the exchange of income for wealth, or wealth for income, then the optimum conversion is provided by gold hoarding, dishoarding. By definition of the marketability in the small, no further improvement in efficiency is possible. However, if the institutional constraints on exchange are removed, then a whole new game comes into play, and indeed, further improvements become possible for the benefit of all participants. On the one hand, the annuitant's need is answered directly by the entrepreneur, who is anxious to give up income in exchange for present wealth. The latter could profitably invest the former's wealth in his business, which would then generate a greater income that he could afford to share. On the other hand, the annuitant's need is answered directly by the inventor, who is ready to give up future wealth in exchange for an income. The latter is working on a new production process that may take several years to perfect before it can be put into place. In the meantime, he has to maintain himself and has to defray the cost of his research and development, R&D. The new tool or process the inventor is perfecting represents future wealth which he is willing to share with his partner, the annuitant, who puts the necessary income at his disposal in the interim. Both the entrepreneur and the inventor are engaged in the business of capital formation. The difference is seen in the method of amortization. The capital formed by the entrepreneur is scheduled to begin its amortization cycle immediately. There is a more or less prolonged waiting period before the capital formed by the inventor can start its amortization cycle. The curse of unemployment. The amount of R&D capital being accumulated by the partnership of the annuitant and the inventor is the most critical indicator of the future shape and health of the economy. In the final analysis, this is what makes the difference between a progressive and a retrogressive economic system. The presence of chronic unemployment in the economy indicates that inventors are being hampered by social or institutional arrangements in their efforts to form R&D capital. From this perspective, the government-run compulsory Social Security and unemployment insurance schemes appear highly retrogressive. Apart from the dubiousness of the procedure whereby the government spends the net premium income on current consumption while letting future taxpayers shoulder the burden of dispersing the retired population, and of the procedure whereby the government pays able-bodied people for not working, there is also the sinister problem of depriving the inventor from his traditional source of financing. The inventor is condemned to idleness. At any rate, his efficiency is greatly reduced, and his talents are wasted. The government-sponsored safety nets are retrogressive because they represent the dissipation of the annuitant's income and the annuitant's wealth, without any redeeming feature as to promoting capital accumulation, in particular the accumulation of R&D capital. This completes the description of the square model of the capital market, where the four corners of the square represent the annuitant, the inventor, the annuitant, and the entrepreneur. The two kinds of partnership that arise in this model correspond to the formation of 1. Entrepreneurial capital, embodied in the partnership of the annuitant and the entrepreneur, and 2. R&D capital, embodied by the partnership of the annuitant and the inventor. Often these partnerships are concealed under family bonds. The father is the annuitant, later annuitant, and the son's the entrepreneur and the inventor. The family is the primitive social unit, providing the framework for the exchange of income and wealth among its members, as the need may arise. The square model of the capital market is a great conceptual improvement over the diagonal model. Still, there is room for further improvement. A short course on capital formation. Zero interest means direct conversion of income into wealth. As a total denial of incentives to exchange income and wealth, it forces the annuitant and the annuitant to revert to atavistic methods of conversion via hoarding and dishoarding the most hoardable commodity. At zero interest, there will be no exchange, only conversion of income into wealth. The point is that the annuitant and the annuitant do have a choice. In the absence of incentives, they will forego exchange, but will go ahead and make the conversion, as planned, through other means. The same choice, however, is not available to the entrepreneur and the inventor. Unlike the annuitant and the annuitant, they are fully dependent on the agency of exchange and credit if they want to make the conversion. The square model of the capital market reveals that the exchange of income and wealth is inherently asymmetric. While the annuitant and the annuitant can still satisfy their need to convert if the exchange fails, the inventor and the entrepreneur cannot. For them it is no exchange, no conversion. The impairment of bargaining power brought out by the square model of the capital market will be assuaged as we pass to the pentagonal and hexagonal model. These models describe the real world more faithfully. Yet it must be clear that the impairment can never be completely removed. The most important consequence of this asymmetry is that the rate of interest can be low, but will always remain positive. The inventor and the entrepreneur can, of course, improve their bargaining position to some extent if they form a partnership whereby the former provides the income needed by the latter. As a result, they will be net long on future wealth and net short on present wealth, In order for the partnership to be viable, they must find a third partner who is willing to provide the needed credit in exchanging present for future wealth. This need has led to the rise of a new actor in the drama of human action. He is the capitalist, and his entry heralds the advent of the pentagonal model of the capital market. The rise of the capitalist is hereby explained not in terms of exploitation, but in terms of services which only a specialist can provide. These services are demanded by the partnership of the marginal inventor and the marginal entrepreneur. The marginal inventor, entrepreneur, is the one who has just missed his chance to form a partnership with a annuitant or annuitant. Without the services of the capitalist, marginal talent would be wasted. Thus, capitalism is seen as a social system which allows individuals to specialize in the exchange of present wealth for future wealth in order to enlarge the scope for entrepreneurial and inventive talent. Much of this talent was lost to society before the advent of capitalism. The triangular partnership of the entrepreneur, the inventor, and the capitalist is the most potent and dynamic force in the economy which society has heretofore produced. Ludwig von Mises considers the individuals in this partnership the most progressive elements in society, benefiting the non-progressive majority in every possible way. The particular combination of talent, brain, and willpower represented by the threesome heralds a new epoch of progress, far beyond the capabilities of individual talents if employed in isolation. There has been many an inventor since Paleolithic times whose genius has been wasted. The steam turbine was invented in the 1st century AD by Hero of Alexandria, the aeroplane in the 15th by Leonardo da Vinci. The efforts of pre-capitalistic inventors, for the most part, came to naught, due to lack of capital and entrepreneurship. The most ingenious technological inventions remain useless if the capital required for their utilization has not been or cannot be accumulated. Capitalism must be seen as the liberator of inventive talent, the creator of wealth and prosperity for the benefit of all. Its creative formula is the trinity of the entrepreneur, the inventor, and the capitalist. One cannot assess the merit of capitalism without explicitly recognizing the great and durable reduction in the rate of interest it has brought about. Indeed, the only valid way to bring down the rate of interest is to enhance the bargaining power of the inventor and the entrepreneur vis-a-vis the annuitant and annuitant through encouraging the activities of the capitalist. If the capitalist is hampered in his activities, then the annuitant and the annuitant will enjoy unrestricted monopoly power and the rate of interest will be high. The capitalist is anxious to break this monopoly. As a result of his competition, the rate of interest has been reduced from the extremely high levels prevailing in pre-capitalistic times to a low level which puts all bona fide inventors and entrepreneurs into business. Even more remarkable is the fact that capitalism has accomplished the feat of reducing the rate of interest without harming the annuitant and the annuitant. Every member of society is a beneficiary of the lower rate of interest brought about by capitalism, through the great increase in the availability of consumer goods at affordable prices, not to mention the unprecedented increases in wage rates. Only with reference to capital accumulation can we explain the practically inexhaustible list of prodigious amenities and previously unheard of comfort and security, the high wage structure, all benefiting the common man, which is due solely to the lowering of the rate of interest by rising capitalism. Many of these great achievements have been frittered away since 1971, the year governments of the industrialized world declared irredeemable currency to be money. This declaration is directly responsible for the steep rise and gyration of interest rates during the past 25 years, a phenomenon that was previously unknown. The capricious increase in the level of interest rates has rendered a vast amount of capital and labor submarginal, caused unemployment, made capital maintenance inadequate, and ultimately led to capital decumulation and destruction. The Shylock Syndrome. The foregoing analysis of the phenomenon of interest in terms of exchanging income and wealth is far superior to the conventional analysis in terms of exchanging present for future goods. No one has ever exchanged an apple available today for 1 1/20 of an apple available a year from now, still less for 2 apples available 50 years from now. So the problem of exchanging present for future wealth does not arise out of any readily identifiable human need. except in the context of these activities of the capitalist in facilitating the exchange of wealth and income, as discussed above. Other than this residual activity of the capitalist, the exchange of present and future wealth has no basis in reality. By contrast, the problem of exchanging income and wealth arises out of natural and universal human needs: the need for educating the young and the need of the elderly for an income. This exchange explains the phenomenon and the nature of interest in terms of the division of labor, that is, by reaching back to lasting fundamentals. Exploitation or temptation to exploit one's economically weaker brethren is not involved, nor is odium or envy. The needs and aspirations of market participants, from the annuitants to the capitalists, are harmonious and complementary. There is no need to detest the capitalist and to depict him as a Scrooge, any more than there is need to detest the heart surgeon and depict him as a butcher. They are both specialists, and their role can be understood only in the context of the need for their specialized services. The capitalist's role only emerges at the margin, after all natural partnerships between the entrepreneur and the inventor have already been formed. Further advance at this point would not be possible without the services of a specialist, specializing in arbitrage between present and future wealth. By contrast, if we look at the problem of exchanging present for future wealth in isolation, before long the image of Shylock and his pound of flesh is conjured up in the mind. Above all, it is this Shylock syndrome that socialist movements have been able to exploit with such consummate skill, appealing to the authority of Aristotle. This view is nurtured by a dismally inadequate understanding of the division of labor. As it appears to the socialist, the contract between lender and borrower demands that the latter be a Superman. Only in uniting in himself the talents of the entrepreneur and the inventor can he meet the terms of his contract in full. How, otherwise, could he be expected to return a greatly enhanced wealth to his creditor at the end of the loan period without ruining himself? Surely, the terms of his contract demanding a pound of flesh from any part of his body was designed with the extinction of his life in mind. What the socialist view disregards is that the capitalist is not dealing with one individual, but with a partnership combining the talents and skills of two, the entrepreneur and the inventor. Had Aristotle understood the problem of converting income and wealth into one another, and its optimal solution via the agency of exchange, credit, and the division of labor, the wind would have been taken out of the sails of socialist agitation before it had a chance to cause so much mischief in the world. Instant reward, instant penalty. Another merit of the pentagonal model is that it makes the process of capital accumulation transparent. If we disregard the primitive accumulation of capital by the artisan fashioning his own tools, a process that no longer plays an important role in the economy of the industrial world, then we shall find that capital can only be formed in one of three possible ways: through the formation of a partnership of 1. The annuitant and the entrepreneur, 2. The annuitant and the inventor, or 3. The entrepreneur, the inventor, and the capitalist. Debt creation does not create capital per se. It only shifts risks implicit in previously existing partnerships, without necessarily producing new wealth. By contrast, the formation of capital in any one of the three combinations described here does in fact create new wealth. Furthermore, the pentagonal model establishes precedence and control among the 5 actors in the drama of human action. Thanks to the existence of these controls, capitalism has become an instant reward-penalty system ensuring unparalleled efficiency. This, incidentally, may be another reason it is hated so by the indolent. The priorities of capitalist society are not set by bureaucrats or by zealots with the power of disposal over the fruits of the savings of others, but by the savers themselves who stand to suffer losses if the project fails. Bureaucratic power under socialism means that mistakes can be heaped upon mistakes without corrections being made. Socialism lacks a feedback mechanism that alone can make timely corrections possible. The hierarchy of controls under capitalism runs along the following lines. The annuitant has veto power over the plans of the capitalist. The annuitant, in concert with the capitalist, has veto power over the plans of the entrepreneur. The annuitant and the capitalist, in concert with the entrepreneur, have veto power over the plans of the inventor. The inventor has no veto power at all, But since there are more annuitants than annuitants under the conditions of positive population growth, capitalist society can employ even more inventive than entrepreneurial talent. The field is wide open for the inventor. A dynamic society tends to put a premium on new ideas. It has natural built-in incentives for higher education and advanced studies, even in the absence of compulsory schooling and government-sponsored research. It is these dynamic forces, represented by net R&D capital formed by the annuitant and the inventor, which create educational facilities and equip laboratories. The government can hardly do more than formalize and standardize these. It certainly cannot guide their destinies. That would be the prerogative of their progenitor, the pentagonal capital market. A government that pretends to do more, one that tries to dictate educational or research priorities, is far from being progressive. It is, in fact, retrogressive, as the present analysis shows. The welfare state as we know it. The pentagonal model of the capital market explodes the myth of the welfare state. According to this myth, the government can finance welfare projects by taxing away some of the profits of the capitalist. However, the activities of the capitalist are marginal, representing but the tip of the iceberg. The incomparably greater part of the capital that society needs in order to provide annuity income for the aged is furnished by less visible partnerships between the annuitant and entrepreneur, or the annuitant and the inventor. Social Security eliminates, or at least severely curtails, voluntary exchange of income for wealth, and thereby hampers capital accumulation. The welfare state confuses charity with entitlement, and its huge commitments in putting Social Security benefits on the basis of universality have no actuarially sound basis in finance. The making of these commitments puts the very people out of business whose savings alone can provide the wherewithal for the projected benefits. We cannot help but view the capitalist economy as an integrated welfare machine. Individuals voluntarily exchange goods against goods, goods against services, and income against wealth, increasing welfare at every turn. In the process, they form voluntary partnerships representing the creation of new wealth through the capitalization of income. The welfare state cannot invade one part of this machine, taking over its functions, and expect that the other parts will go on performing satisfactorily. This invasion means the forcible dissolution of partnerships and the dissipation of their capital. The assets disappear, yet the corresponding liability in the consolidated balance sheet of the nation remains. It will have to be balanced by printing government bonds, payable in irredeemable currency. As long as the purveyors of goods and services continue accepting irredeemable currency in exchange for real goods and services, the game of musical chairs can go on. But as the capital structure of the nation is seriously eroded, the production of goods and services become more costly, and producers suffer losses. At one point, they must raise prices, or, if they can't, go out of business. Either way, the benefits promised by the welfare state are jeopardized by currency depreciation and destruction of capital. The welfare state must be seen against this background. It is an accomplice in the scheme of currency debasement, and more ominously, in the scheme to dissipate and destroy the nation's accumulated capital. During the past year or so, the leaders of several industrial nations have solemnly announced the end of the era of big governments with big deficits, and started talking about the need to downsize the welfare state. In view of the foregoing analysis, this is certainly a positive development. However, these leaders have failed to make the necessary connection between the welfare state and the promises of which are impossible to fulfill, and the regime of irredeemable currency that can make every promise appear credible that vote-buying politicians may care to make. The truth is that a meaningful review of the premises of the welfare state must of necessity include a review of the premises of the regime of irredeemable currency. Are our politicians ready for such a review? The gold bond. Further division of labor saw the rise of a sixth participant, the investment banker, and the emergence of what we may figuratively call the hexagonal model of the capital market. Just as the rise of the capitalist was explained above in terms of the special services he was to provide to the marginal entrepreneur and the marginal inventor, so the rise of the investment banker is explained here in terms of the special services he is to provide to the marginal annuitant and the marginal annuitant. The marginal annuitant and annuitant is the one who has just missed his chance to form a partnership with the inventor or entrepreneur. Without the services of the investment banker, much of the marginal resources of society would be wasted. No two annuities are alike, and trading them would be difficult or impossible in the absence of an instrument readily exchangeable for either. The success of the capital market depends on the availability of a versatile and standardized trading instrument which can be used as 1, the standard of capital values, and 2, the balancing item of liabilities on capital account. This instrument is the gold bond. It evidences debt payable at maturity in gold, and provides an interest income till maturity, also payable in gold. The income is represented by the coupons attached to the bond. The gold bond is traded in a broadly based secondary market, and a sinking fund is established to make sure that its market value does not erode with time. It is incumbent on the issuer of the bond to do everything in his power to keep the market value of the bond stable, if need be, by retiring some of the outstanding issue prematurely. It is the price of the gold bond that determines the rate of interest. As prices, the rate of interest is also an outcome of the market process. However, keep in mind that the bond market is the epitome of a far larger and far more pervasive capital market encompassing every conceivable exchange of wealth for income, most of which is not readily visible. The investment banker's function is clearing and brokering. He matches the various and varied demands thrown upon the capital market from its 5 corners. He enters into partnership with the annuitant, the entrepreneur, the inventor, and the capitalist, as the need may arise, through his specialized instruments of mortgage and annuity contracts. He balances the net liability or asset arising from this activity through his purchase or sale of the standardized instrument, the gold bond. In effect, the investment banker is doing arbitrage between the 6 corners of the capital market. The hexagonal model of the capital market opens up a great increase in scope for the most successful combination of production, the triangle of the entrepreneur, the inventor, and the capitalist. From now on, they can form their partnership even if unbeknownst to one another. The inventor need not waste time in seeking out a congenial entrepreneur, nor the entrepreneur in finding a suitable inventor. If the invention is good and the enterprise is sound, they can immediately start production on the most favorable terms through the good offices of the matchmaker, the investment banker. Nor does the capitalist have to remain wedded to the same inventor and entrepreneur for the entire duration of the project. Through buying and selling gold bonds, he can always go after the project that appears most promising to him. Thus, the problem of forming optimal triangles is safely thrown onto the bond market. The sterility of gold. Aristotle introduced the concept of natural law and concluded that taking and paying interest on borrowed money violated it. Gold and silver are, by nature, sterile. Any return to productive investment belongs to labor in full. No part of it ought to go to the lender of capital resources. The church embraced the notion of natural law, and the usury doctrine became a church doctrine. Roman law was combined with the teachings of Aristotle to become canon law. The prohibition on interest was designed to protect the debtor, but to the increasing embarrassment of the canonists, it had the exact opposite effect. It increased both the cost and the risk of doing business. After the Code Napoleon, adopted all over Western Europe, had allowed the paying and taking of interest, the Church, too, decided to abandon the old usury doctrine. It was quietly buried in 1830, when the Sacred Penitentiary issued instructions to confessors not to disturb penitents who had lent or borrowed money at the legal rate of interest. Recently, mainstream economic orthodoxy has revived the old doctrine of Aristotle about the sterility of gold. No textbook in economics that mentions gold at all fails to add that gold is a barren asset, incapable of producing a return. Holders of gold are portrayed as morons waiting for doomsday, unwilling or unable to do anything constructive for society. This opinion is echoing Keynes, who was the first economist suggesting that there was something bordering on the neurotic involved in the desire to hold a sterile asset. However, the neurosis is not on the receiving side of the anti-gold propaganda. Rather, it is on the giving side. Governments have pangs of conscience with respect to their citizens and creditors, with whom they have broken faith on several counts. Instead of making a clean breast of it, they have made it incumbent upon the economic profession to develop new doctrines to cover up chicanery and duplicity, to justify fraudulent bankruptcies, retroactive laws, devaluations, and debt abatements. Politicians and servile economists are still bad-mouthing gold as if it was a narcotic. They have triumphantly declared that gold is dead. Yet the corpse still stirs, and it keeps haunting the house of cards built upon irredeemable promises. The phrase sterility of gold needs to be scrutinized. For Aristotle, it meant that gold, unlike corn, cannot be sown in the soil in order to harvest more gold later. His condemnation of usury was dictated by what he conceived to be natural law. Mainstream economists mean something else by that phrase. They admit that even corn is sterile in the sense of Aristotle. To reap a harvest takes more than seed corn and soil. Capital in the form of fertilizers, tilling, and harvesting tools must also be introduced, along with human labor, in order to make the seed corn productive. Seed corn is just one of the numerous factors of production, and only the full complement of all these factors can be considered productive. And since all these factors can be purchased with money, it is well understood that money can be productive in the hands of entrepreneurs. This fact is reflected by the willingness of banks to pay interest to depositors on money they pass along to producers. In this sense, it is admissible to say that money is productive. It can earn a return. Excuse me. Mainstream economists do not deny that gold was productive in this generalized sense under the gold standard, but they insist that, with the advent of the new millennium, gold has forever lost its former productive power to the irredeemable bill of credit. Gold has become sterile again. It can earn no return. Only irredeemable bills of credit can. It is important for us to realize that every word of the doctrine on the sterility of gold is an outright lie. Not only can the owner of gold earn a return in gold on his holdings even under the regime of irredeemable currency, but gold is the only form of tangible wealth that can be lent out at interest and that is in constant demand as such. There is a lively gold loan market in the world. Gold is put out in loans and is borrowed at interest on a regular basis. It is used in financing great capital projects as well as trade, in the same way, although not on the same scale, as it always did under the gold standard. Under these loan contracts, both principal and interest are payable in gold. Nor is this something new. Gold lending has continued uninterrupted in countries where the necessary legal protection of contracts involving gold loans has not been abrogated. Demonetization did not succeed in abolishing the lending and borrowing gold at interest. It only abolished the truth about it. Even students of economics are deliberately kept in the dark about the existence, functioning, and extent of these gold loan markets. The reasons for this obscurantism are not hard to find. The rate of interest on gold loans is low and stable. The much higher and more volatile rates of interest payable on loans made in irredeemable currency could not stand comparison with it. Dissemination of truth could raise awkward questions about the legitimacy of the present monetary regime. People might inquire why they cannot have a monetary system that would automatically guarantee the lowest possible rate of interest. Part 3. The redistribution of losses. The gold bond is essential to the theory of interest presented in this essay. The formation of the rate of interest under a regime where interest is payable in irredeemable currency is an entirely different matter. The central bank's attempt to keep a lid on the rate of interest is doomed, as this effort incorporates the contradictory aims of monetary policy and interest rate policy. Open market operations in bonds can indeed be used to lower the interest rates that are high due to currency depreciation. The central bank goes into the open market and buys government bonds. As a result, bond prices go up, or what is the same, interest rates go down. But the flip side of this is that now there's even more irredeemable currency in circulation. This cannot help but make the pace of currency depreciation increase. Yet it was the fast appreciation of the currency that was responsible for the high interest rate structure in the first place. In other words, while the central bank is fighting a side effect of the disease, it only makes the root cause more entrenched. Furthermore, under the regime of irredeemable currency, malevolent bond speculation overwhelms and strangles benign bond arbitrage. Recall that under the gold standard, there was no bond speculation, none whatever. There was only arbitrage between different maturities, keeping the yield curve in good shape. The price of bonds, and with it the rate of interest, was remarkably stable, precluding profitable speculation. But when governments left the path of monetary and fiscal rectitude and started passing retroactive laws, declaring fraudulent bankruptcy, devaluing the currency under false pretenses, reneging on gold clauses enshrined in their bond obligations, and embracing the policy of debt abatement, they threw the value of their outstanding bonds to the winds. The arbitrageurs responsible for maintaining stability in the bond market are gradually forced to vacate the field, their place in being taken over by speculators who thrive in volatile markets. The entire character of the bond market and bond trading has changed beyond recognition. The rational basis upon which bond values rest was overthrown when gold redeemability of the currency was abolished. The fanatic denial of this fact is central to mainstream economic orthodoxy. Nevertheless, the disappearance of predictable arbitrage and the advent of unpredictable speculation makes for violent and increasing fluctuations in the rate of interest, throwing the capital markets into turmoil. No longer does the propensity to save regulate the availability of long-term credit through the mechanism of the interest rate structure. The regime of irredeemable currency is characterized by a chronic paucity of savings, regardless how high the rate of interest may go. Savers are not blind to the fact that their savings, denominated as they must be in a depreciating currency, are continually and systematically plundered. Their protector against plunder, the gold coin, has been ousted from the system. But the savers are not entirely defenseless. They can fight back. They could consume their savings before further depreciation takes its toll. More ominously, they can extend their consumption beyond the limits set by existing savings if they plunge into debt in an effort to turn a bad situation created by the depreciating currency to advantage. It can hardly be doubted that a lot of this is occurring in the world today. Crossing the wires at the traffic light. The regime of irredeemable currency creates a disharmony between individual and society, where harmony has reigned before. Through a false incentive system, this regime inhibits capital accumulation and, ultimately, it promotes capital consumption. The need to convert income into wealth is overtaken by the need to protect oneself against plunder. The propensity to save is corrupted by the false view that savings can be substituted by debt. While there are natural limits to debt creation under a gold standard, all such limits have been thrown to the winds under the regime of irredeemable currency. The volume of total debt increases exponentially as interest paid on the old debt is immediately converted into new debt. The mechanism to liquidate debt has been dismantled. Debt can no longer be liquidated, and at maturity it is dumped into the lap of the government. As for the government, there is simply no way to retire its debt. Redeeming a government bond in irredeemable currency merely replaces interest-bearing debt by non-interest-bearing debt, that is, by a less desirable form of debt, making the debt pyramid even more unstable. In the meantime, total debt is increasing exponentially, following the law of compound interest. The inordinate growth of the debt behemoth and the ongoing capital destruction inevitably led to a credit collapse. Inevitably lead to a credit collapse. The forcible removal of gold from the heart of the credit system in 1971 was ill-advised. It brought about a radical change in the character of the bond market. It drove out the arbitrageur. and invited in the bond speculator. The regime of irredeemable currency crosses the wires at the traffic light. It sends the red signal to producers when the green signal is intended. High interest rates beget even higher interest rates, as speculators keep betting on lower currency and bond values. Threatened by even higher interest rates, producers are confronted with endless capital losses. This is a regime of hot money jumping around nervously from place to place, seeing no safety anywhere, but going from places that seem unsafe to places that, for the moment, seem less unsafe. This is a regime under which men are afraid to make long-term plans or to grant long-term commitments. This is a regime that encourages farmers to eat the seed corn, the dairyman to slaughter the milch cow for the meat, and the orchard owner to cut down the fruit trees for firewood. This is a regime of junk bonds. The degeneration of the bond market into a casino where gamblers run riot pronounces a most devastating verdict on the regime of irredeemable currency. Previously, all owners of capital, including the speculators, were subjected to the same discipline, and were constrained in their activities by a market process making them servants of the general public. If they correctly anticipated changes caused by the uncertain future, speculators would reap profits. But if they failed to do this, then they would suffer losses, and unless they mended their ways in time, they would lose their capital to others who were better at serving the public. Now, under a new dispensation granted by the regime of irredeemable currency, speculators can be self-serving without the obligation to promote the general welfare. They grow fat on the sweat and blood of the public. All they need to do in order to make a killing is to outguess the government bureaucrats whose job it is to manipulate currency and bond values. The dance of the derivatives. In the economic literature, it is customary to make a distinction between stabilizing and destabilizing speculation. The distinction is spurious. All legitimate speculation is stabilizing, if by legitimate we understand speculation addressing risks inherent in nature, e.g., weather, natural disasters, etc. By abuse of language, the word speculation nowadays is applied to market activity that addresses risks presented not by nature but by arbitrary government action. However, a word already exists in the dictionary to describe this kind of activity, namely gambling. Properly understood, under the regime of irredeemable currency, participation in foreign exchange and bond markets, including derivative markets and futures and options, is not speculation but gambling. The risks involved have been artificially created by arbitrary measures, just as increased participation at the roulette table cannot reduce the risks of betting and can often increase them. Increased speculation in the bond markets cannot reduce price fluctuations, but is more likely to increase them. Under a gold standard, speculation in grains is economically justified by the existence of future uncertainties presented by nature. In the case of an unexpected crop failure or bumper crop, the price disturbance is minimized by the presence of a speculative supply or demand. No such justification for bond speculation can be offered. All the risks are wholly artificial and cannot be reduced by inviting speculative participation. On the contrary, price swings are likely to increase along with increased participation. This is a case of pure gambling. The linguistic innovation of calling it speculation will not change its nature. Government economists suggest that the derivative markets in interest rate futures have the same salutary effect on interest rates as future markets in grains have on grain prices. There is not the slightest evidence to support this claim. The effort to smooth out interest rate fluctuations under the regime of irredeemable currency by creating more opportunities for bond speculation and for trading derivatives and interest rate futures is doomed. Opening ever more derivative markets will backfire. More gambling creates more uncertainty, not less. The regime of irredeemable currency is characterized by insufficient capital accumulation on maintenance and, ultimately, by capital destruction. It cannot be rescued by legalizing gambling. The dance of derivatives of 1994-95 gave a foretaste of what is to come. Banks, commission houses, pension funds, and even municipal governments are known to have gambled and to have suffered grievous losses, some irreparable. Observers blame the debacle on inept or dishonest traders. A more adroit analysis would, however, show that disaster had to strike in any case. The same thing would have happened even if traders had been meticulously following the traditional methods of hedging and arbitrage. The truth is that the old rules no longer apply. Once the sheet anchor of gold has been removed, the character of the game has changed beyond recognition. Previously, gold acted as the policeman keeping speculators in line. Because of the presence of gold in the system, the speculators could gang up in order to bid up commodity prices or to drive down foreign exchange rates and bond values, only at their own peril. Their bidding would immediately be confronted with relentless arbitrage, exacting a heavy penalty for reckless bidding. Arbitrageurs could count on gold, the policeman of the system, in resisting recklessness and speculation. But with the policeman fired and no replacement commissioned, speculators can gang up with impunity, induce and ride price trends unilaterally until they are ready to make a killing. Speculation has become malignant. Speculators ran up the price of sugar to 75 cents a pound and that of crude oil to $42 a barrel, and made money all the way up. They drove down the price of a $1,000 treasury bond to $500 and the yen price of the US dollar to 78, and made money all the way down. And they made a killing when they sold sugar at 75 cents, crude oil at 42, and when they bought treasury bonds at 500, the US dollars at 78 yens. During these episodes, arbitrageurs have been conspicuous only by their absence. They are intimidated in the absence of the police, and are gradually withdrawing their services. When the last arbitrageur abandons the market, the speculators will have a field day. They will bid commodity prices up to the sky, and drive currencies and bonds to the ground. Without the guarantees of the gold standard, no arbitrageur will be able to oppose the speculators when the bull run in commodities and the bear run in securities start in earnest. Sweeping losses under the rug. The term redistributive society, as it is used by both its protagonists and antagonists, refers to the redistribution of wealth and income after they have been produced. More ominously, a movement to redistribute future losses is afoot. If successful, losses will be perpetuated and passed on to society. The scheme will allow the indolent, the inefficient, the inept, and the consistent loss maker to continue in business indefinitely at the expense of the industrious, the efficient, and the profit conscious. But if the distinction between profit and loss is obliterated, society's internal communication system may be falsified. Ultimately, production would be thrown into confusion. The leitmotif of our chrysophobic age can be described as a parade of the loss makers. The profit conscious must be cowed into submission. The gold standard is anathema to the lobby of the loss makers, and gold puts profit and loss into the sharpest focus, separating the adept from the inept, the industrious from the indolent. The lobby wants a system under which distinction between profit and loss becomes fuzzy. Inefficiency can be covered up, and ineptitude entrenched. What is true for firms is also true for governments. The post-war monetary system is a creature of the victors, in particular of the US and the British governments. Its thinly veiled purpose is to accommodate indolence and ineptitude in international trade. Its authors have openly advocated a monetary system that gladly tolerates deficits and unhesitatingly penalizes surpluses on current account. In practice, the vanquished, especially the German and Japanese governments, were forced to make their central banks a dumping ground for an endless stream of unwanted paper issued by the victors. The unlimited demand thereby created for U.S. Treasury issues makes the illusion in the public mind that the millennium of irredeemable currency has indeed arrived at the long last. We should be well advised not to fall victim to this hoax. We should not be misled by the docility of the German and Japanese governments in playing faultlessly their pre-assigned role in the farce. They have absorbed losses counted in trillions without ever saying ouch. The Japanese started accumulating irredeemable paper when it cost them 360 yens to buy $1, as opposed to the 1995 low of 78 yens to the dollar. The corresponding figure for the Germans is 4.5 marks to the dollar initially, as opposed to the 1995 low of 1 1/3 marks to the dollar. The Germans and the Japanese are still sitting on mountains of paper losses that nobody is reporting, still less willing to discuss. Yet it is the destiny of paper losses that sooner or later they must be realized. Could it be that the collapse of the stock market in Japan earlier in the decade, the present banking crisis there, and the recent weakening of the German financial structure are signs of the beginning of the end? Losses are a stubborn thing. They refuse to go out of existence, no matter how docile the victims of the redistribution of losses may be. This is a dangerous game of deception that governments can continue playing only at their own peril. Part 4. Whither Gold? Gold in the monetary system makes for stability and efficiency. One cannot disparage either of these virtues any more than one can disparage motherhood. A low and stable interest rate structure, in particular, cannot be achieved without making credit gold bonded. This elementary truth is now in the public domain, even though universities have been somewhat tardy in accepting it. But the U.S. Congress would be well within its constitutional authority if it provided monetary leadership to the world. It is possible that a majority of members in that body will come to realize that, in order to be master in their own house, they must get hold of the wild card in the pack. If they want to control the budget deficit, they must regain control over the cost of debt servicing, the very wild card they haven't got. In order to get hold of the wild card, Congress must once more make the public debt gold bonded. A debt payable in irredeemable promises is being phased out, and gold bonded debt is being phased in. The interest rate structure will be stabilized at the lowest level compatible with the state of the economy. Only then can a meaningful program of deficit and debt reduction be implemented. As long as the wild card is out, a collapse in the bond market will remain a constant threat. A skyrocketing interest rates can frustrate any plan for deficit reduction. The expertise in how to execute the transition exists within the halls of Congress. In 1989, Representative William E. Dannemeyer of California, now in retirement, pioneered a scheme of deficit reduction based on the idea of turning short-term high-cost debt by long-term low-cost debt. The miracle of turning water into wine can be accomplished by making the debt gold bonded. Presently, Senator Bennett of Utah is championing a similar plan. With the aid of gold, the debt behemoth could be reined in, provided the political will and statesmanship is there. How to cork the genie in the bottle. Why is gold relevant today? Clement Chow's saying that war is too important to leave to the generals may be paraphrased as interest rates are too important to leave to the central bankers. The genie of interest rates has been let out of the bottle, and nobody, not even Aladdin Greenspan, can tame it. There is too much destruction and uncertainty in the world caused by gyrating interest rates. It is time to put the genie back into the bottle and cork it. This is where gold comes in. Only a golden cork will do. The genie has learned how to sneak through corks made of paper. We don't even have a coherent theory of interest without reference to gold. Under the regime of irredeemable currency, interest is merely bribe money, trying to persuade reluctant holders of irredeemable promises to hang on a while longer. The maturity structure of the U.S. public debt is contracting. Clearly, this process cannot continue indefinitely. The size of the bribe expected increases with the amount of the fast-maturing debt. Gold cannot be wished away from the credit system. It is there, like it or not. Gold is the only conceivable standard of borrowing. The lowest rate of interest is available for gold-bonded debt, and for no other. Loans payable in irredeemable currency carry progressively higher rates of interest. How high they go depends on public fear of currency depreciation. Paradoxically, gold's importance is growing, while its dispersal from the official hoards and the mines continues apace. Dispersed gold represents latent power, far greater in scope than its nominal market value, as sound credit can be built only upon a gold base. When the dispersal of gold reaches a certain threshold, nobody knows where exactly this threshold is, a metamorphosis of money will take place. Gold will reclaim its throne as constitutional monarch in the monetary and credit system of the world. Unfortunately, the transition may not be trouble-free. Procrastination in overdue monetary reform brings with it the danger of a credit collapse, similar to that experienced under the Great Depression of 1929 to 39, causing widespread economic pain in the world. Educating public opinion to look at gold as a gift of Prometheus rather than Pandora's box after 75 years of vicious chrysophobic agitation and propaganda presents us with a formidable task. Yet we must do what we can to disseminate the truth about gold. The consequences of the alternative, a credit collapse engulfing the entire world, are too horrible to contemplate.